Welcome. Welcome to the OMEP Seminar Series 2001 through 2022 in Early Childhood Cares and Education in Debate. I'm Soon Hwan Kim, President of the OMEP Korea, and I'll serve as a moderator of this webinar. Follow the guidelines for these participants. The first one, the translation channels in the word icons is that appear in the art below, so everyone can see the language to listen. The seminar will have simultaneous translation channels in the three official languages of the OMEP. The chat will be used only, write the questions for the specialist, and then all the participants can write the question while the seminar is developing. The microphone will be muted during the sessions, and duration of the seminar will be 15 minutes during the 1 hour. You will have maybe the 15 minutes of the presentation by all those speakers, and then maybe the 5 minutes for the specialists to answer the questions that arise. We have the webinar will include the keynote presentation from the three specialists who have several expertise on a child and political advocacy. So we have Rajakumari, Michael, and Giovanna, Modé, and Mercedes. All those three specialists to present at this webinar gives the greater meanings. First of all, we have Rajakumari. Michael is the human right of the professional with over 15 years of experience in various aspects of human rights, including human rights of education and research and monitoring and training and interventions and advocacy. So being the organ of the advocacy of the right to education, she has closely worked with the children and educators in India from the pre-primary to the secondary level. So she joined the RTE in February 2021 and has previously worked with a range of national and international NGOs and organizations. And she holds a master's degree in human rights from the University of Essex and then postgraduate from diploma in international human rights, law from the National Law School of the India University. Second, Giovanna Modé is the head of the policy of the Latin America campaigns for the rights to education, regional networking based on Sao Paulo. As such, she actually participated in civil society and advocacy of the process of towards the adoption of the SDGs at the United Nations, and more recently in its follow-up and implementation in Latin America and the Caribbean. So she holds a master's and a PhD study in the sociology of the education by the School of Education, University of Sao Paulo, in this research program. And her research topic includes the human rights, children's rights, and international migrants with several articles and respects of published. As you all know, last speaker will be Mercedes, is the world president of the OMEP, and since the January 1st in 2021. So National Normal Teachers graduated in Education Science, University of Buenos Aires. So former directors of the early childhood education area of the city of Buenos Aires. Currently, she is a professor in the master's degrees in early childhood education at the University of Buenos Aires in the regional programs and training in planning and management of the education policy and Buenos Aires area and the Office of Latin America. So she also elected a member of the coordination groups of a collective constellation of the NGOs on education 2030. So these are all those three speaks for today. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you Mercedes, World President of the OMEP.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. From OMEP World Presidency, I am pleased to launch this first session of the OMEP Seminar Series. Since its foundation in 1948, OMEP has worked for 73 years for the realization of human rights of children under the age of 8. The central approach of our action is education, because we understand it is a human right and a tool for the achievement of other rights. OMEP has focused its work on early childhood because it is a founding moment in the development of every human being, and because it is an ethical mandate to take care of the new generations. We therefore understand that early childhood care and education is of critical importance in guiding and enriching the holistic development of each child to ensure solid foundation for their well-being and lifelong learning. Early childhood education has the potential to forge open, capable, responsible, and committed citizens to building a sustainable world and realizing their own lives and those of their communities. In order to ensure ECCE policies and pedagogical definitions are required, and therefore OMEP actions prioritize political advocacy based on the perspective of human rights and pedagogical knowledge as dialectically related fields. By political advocacy, we mean the process to influence public policies and on budget decisions within the political, economical, social, and institutional systems of countries, aimed at protecting the right of ECCE and thus to children's full development. Actions include lobbying, reaching out to governments, legislators, and leaders, as well as developing research, reports, and campaigns in the media, public conferences, publications, seminars. The construction of political advocacy involves planning and managing strategies to ensure development to legal regulatory frameworks and public policies that helps to carry them out. These frameworks are applicable legal instrument and specific rules for realizing and addressing the right to education and have different levels and scope international, national, and local. One of the most effective and important working scenarios is the United Nations system. Since its creation, OMEP members have been active at the global level, closely linked to UNESCO. From this important alliance, we were building links with the rest of the United Nations system, and that is why OMEP is recognized by ECOSOC as an organization with a special consultative status. The presence and action of OMEP in UNESCO, UNICEF, WHO, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the Committee on the Rights of the Child is essential for the advocacy work. All these agencies convene and organize key policy-making meetings and have an impact on early childhood at global, regional, and national levels. This year, in my work as member of the UNESCO Coordination Group of the Collective Consultation of NGOs Education 2030, I participated in the preparation of a document on the role of civil society organization in these major scenarios. We therefore state that civil society organizations consider themselves as critical friends and partners that help governments, international organizations, and other stakeholders to deliver on their pledge to achieve a broad and transformative education in line with the vision set out in the Agenda 2030 and its education goal. Civil society organizations lobby for a humanistic view of education that shapes societies based on human rights, sustainability, and diversity. From an historical perspective, it is important to know that OMEP representatives actively participated in the long work of drafting the Convention on the Rights of the Child within the committee coordinated by UNICEF, as well as in the General Common Number 7, Realizing Rights of the Child in Early Childhood, which was disseminated in 2005. During the years of 2013, 14, and 15, OMEP, along with other activists, developed a strong advocacy action so that ECCE could be considered within the 2030 agenda, achieving for the first time in history the incorporation of early childhood education in Target 4.2, in which states commit to ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development care and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education. OMEP also advocated for early childhood to be considered in other goals of the 2030 agenda in order to guarantee comprehensive protection of all the human rights enshrined for children. But the challenge is not to define an agenda for development, sustainability, and realization of human rights. The real challenge is to ensure that the Agenda 2030 is fulfilled. As we know, the pandemic is a humanitarian crisis that accentuated inequalities, injustice, environmental, economic, and social problems, and has directly affected early childhood, causing great suffering. Before COVID-19, it was already difficult to make the rights of young children visible, and this was exacerbated by the first health measures, the confinement, the closure of education, primary health care services, and of course, the economic crisis. The vulnerability of children living in poverty, with disabilities, in situation of migration, asylum, children, indigenous or ethnic minorities has also increased. Some studies also indicate an increase in domestic violence and abuse. Therefore, within the global, regional, and national level, OMEP also participates in the follow-up and monitoring of the indicators of achievement of the 2030 agenda. In the global level, we work in the United Nations systems. For many years, OMEP has had a group of representatives at the United Nations headquarters in New York, in Geneva, at UNESCO Paris, and in the CCNGO Education 2030. The topics covered have been diverse: rights of migrants and refugee children, fight against racism, rights of women and girls, building peace societies, education for sustainable development, the right to water, the right to play and culture, the right to literacy, and among others. The last 18 months, OMEP had participated in the definition of UNESCO Futures of Education initiative, the meetings organized by UNESCO Institute of Statistics, as well as the planning of UNESCO medium-term strategy for 2022-2029. A recent and very important advocacy initiative we were working on is the Global Partnership Strategy for Early Childhood Education and Care, which will surely catalyze multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration at the global, regional, national, and local level to promote the right and protection of children. The working group we are part of defined 5 strategies. OMEP has proposed within Strategy 5 to promote the declaration of a United Nations decade dedicated to early childhood. Finally, I would like to highlight the participation of OMEP in the high-level political forum that brings together all the governments of the world at the United Nations in July of each year to monitor the progress of the 2030 Agenda. During the organizing process of the sessions, representing OMEP as world president, I have participated in the drafting of reports and statements with other civil society organizations. At the regional level, OMEP participates in the regional meetings of education ministers organized by UNESCO and other activities proposed by UNICEF, WHO, and other agencies. At both levels, regional and global, a key strategy for advocacy is the promotion of synergies and alliances with national and regional education networks and coalitions and in international civil society organization. We maintain regional alliance with GLADE, ARNET, the Global Campaign for Education, Eurochild, Ed Heroes Foundation, ASPAE, the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, Right to Education Initiative, among others. At the national level, it is important to note that OMEP has national committees in 66 countries in 5 regions of the world. This assures potential to advocate to the protection of young children's rights before many governments. Several national committees work in the drafting of laws, in the definition of ECC policies, and in the definition of plans and guidelines for early childhood education. Most of them also participate in training educators in the search of quality education. At national and local level, a major challenge is to fight against inequalities in access and about quality of services and programs. The priorities should be the articulation of the voices of the communities and actors of the most marginalized and invisible groups, so that they are considered in the decisions and in public policies. To conclude, we all know that young children tend to be more lagging behind in the management of education public policies, and that this has been exacerbated in periods of crisis such as the one we are currently experiencing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments are leaving behind their commitments to early childhood and prioritizing budgets and supports in primary and secondary education, in investment in new technologies supported by connectivity and virtuality. The recognition of young children as right holders from birth drive us to improve our knowledge and our strategies to develop a political advocacy in order to ensure an inclusive, equitable, and quality education and care as a priority in the pandemic recovery measures, which countries are considering right now. We have a big challenge because disadvantaged girls and boys are less likely to access early childhood education services. The gross preschool enrollment rate is still 61% in 2019. Equitable access is a prerequisite for inclusion. 1 in 4 children does not have access to education during the year prior to their entry into primary school. In other words, in many countries of the world, states do not fulfill their commitment to guarantee 1 year of preschool before entering primary education. Access is related to the economic level of the families. The private offer is usually stronger at this educational level, but only children with wealthy families can access it. Thus, inclusion and access to quality early childhood education and care is more a privilege of few than a right of all. OMEP members must continue to develop and strengthen advocacy, focusing on financing, articulation, and intersectoriality, strengthening governance, recognizing diversity, and more than anything, making excluded population visible. This task is not possible without strengthening the fundamental role of participation and contribution of civil society in this collective debate and construction. Let us continue working, supported by the human rights perspective and our commitment to the 2030 Agenda and the Education 2030 Framework for Action. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mercedes. Okay, we'll move on to the next presenter. Next is Giovanna. You'll speak now.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me, Sue? Can you confirm?
Yes.
Okay, so good morning, everyone from São Paulo, Brazil. That's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm delighted actually to participate with you in such an interesting seminar with dear friends and colleagues here. So many thanks to Mercedes and OMEP team for this kind invitation. We have had the privilege of working together for many years, learning from and learning with OMEP. So that we really consider our sister network here, sharing many advocacy process and struggles as well. So a great pleasure to participate here. For those ones, very quickly, for those ones who don't know us, CLADE, the Latin America Campaign for the Right to Education, is a plural network of civil society organizations with presence in 18 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region. And we work to promote the human right to a transformative, public, free education for all as state's responsibility. In this sense, early childhood care and education has an important place in our agenda and advocacy work. So I will take this opportunity to share some of our reflections and maybe some strategies related to this topic that are basically lessons learned from our collective work in the past few years with our members and partners. One first point I wanted to raise is related to the importance of having, first of all, a common political and legal basis. We all know the main challenges, many challenges related to advocate in defense of ECCE is that the promotion of child's rights involves different sectors and government levels, from local to global levels. It involves also a set of political and legal frameworks, programs, and practices, in addition to a broad understanding of children as subjects of rights. It seems very complex, and yes, it is actually, and challenging. And however, all different measures and actions should have a common political and legal basis. That is our Convention on the Rights of the Child that turned 32 years old and remains extremely relevant, more vivid than ever, with its debates, country reviews, general comments, and so on and so forth. And also because it has influenced several national and local legislations all over the world. And as civil society movements, a first key step from our point of view is to have such tools in hand and appropriated, not only in terms of its content, but also in terms of pathways to action from a rights perspective. I mean, if it is a right, what should I do in case of a violation? Where to go, where to denounce it, what to do, how to make governments accountable for that. And that's one important part, one very important part of the story, actually, but not the only one. And I wanted to, what takes me to my second point, That is, in addition to that, the need of having a common scenario analysis, a common context reading, that we consider that another key starting point to build and to sustain our advocacy work is to undertake collective efforts of reading our challenging contexts. And I'm glad to say that because that's an exercise that we have been doing a lot in alliance with OMEP too, always asking ourselves where we are, the image of our times, giving an example from our region here, in Latin America and the Caribbean. The universal access to ECC programs is not a reality for many sectors of the population. There are enormous disparities. Despite progress in laws and in some cases in policy frameworks, there's still a great fragmentation, lack of coordination, lack of public financing, lack of recognition of the role of educators, among many other issues. Moreover, the combination of austerity policies, budget cuts, and more recently, the effects of the pandemics resulted in even bigger challenges. And we're talking about the most unequal region, so we must also ask ourselves who is left behind and why, to try to understand this combination of income inequalities, racial, gender, among many other factors as disabilities or migration status or rural condition, among many others as we know, and consider this key and precious analysis in our advocacy work. And more than this, actually, we found out it is also fundamental to share common understanding of what is the purpose of education and ECC in particular in the scenario of multiple crises. What ECC basically we want to push for. And we have been learning together also a lot from the Professor Peter Moss, who stressed that over the last 4 decades, ECC has become a policy priority in many countries, that's true. However, under the dominant narrative that it is a means to achieve economical development, a narrative, he has named it the story of quality and high returns. It means, in short, that countries need human capital, so ECC can be crucial for that. So the debate immediately is what works for this purpose. However, he argues, and we fully agree from our side, education and ECC in particular goes far beyond being also a political practice, as we know. What is very good to say, in the year we celebrate 100 years of the anniversary of Paulo Freire, this wonderful educator from our region that defended knowledge as a tool to change the reality, to promote critical thinking, so that people can generate action, proposals, alternatives, to have hope. And in this sense, there are many other questions to be raised related to the purpose of our ECC programs, the way they see children, the role of educators, the place of families, and which fundamental values they include, the role of playing, cooperation, solidarity, among many others issues. So it is clear that our advocacy work includes not only changing normative frameworks and policies where it's needed, but also changing the way ECC is perceived in its main purpose. It involves having a strong narrative. It involves dialogue with citizens and public opinion. We know we cannot do this without communication and awareness campaigns, without media, or without promoting grassroots debates. Well, I'm moving on to my next point. It is also important to consider that this context reading includes also mapping the spaces and actors that are producing ECC policies, and to push to enlarge those spaces. And that's an advocacy point in itself, from our point of view, very important. The struggle to civil society participation in the political debate, in policy making, in decision-making process, and in monitoring and evaluation. From a challenge where that we perceive from local to global at all levels as a matter of principle, the right to participate. What is crucial from a democratic perspective, but also because it really qualifies policies. The result in itself is much better when you are listening carefully to its subjects. Teachers must have a say, students must have a say, small children too, obviously using appropriate tools for that. And very unfortunately, it is not given for granted. We have faced more and more closed spaces of civil society. And actually, as a sign of our times of weakened democracies, we can feel it in our daily work. Not only when we are not invited to be part of the discussion, but also when communities try to raise their voices without being heard, when educators' voices are not taken into account, when at the end of the day, youth students are repressed with violence when protesting and claiming for their rights. And we have no choice rather than insist to be heard. Well, moving on to maybe my last reflection that has to do a little bit more with our possibilities. I have stressed some principles and challenges of our advocacy work, but I wanted also to share some possibilities that reminding us the potential of our actions, of being part of rights organizations, education networks, inviting us to see ourselves as part of this global movement that is committed to the promotion of child's rights. We are, first of all, we are in a very unique position of connecting local grassroots mobilizations with global advocacy process. And that's very special. We have to be aware of this. Our representatives at global policy spaces can be fully informed and connected with the local level. Same thing when we are doing local advocacy, we can be fully connected to the global level, and that's something very unique. As I said, one level is not more important than the other one. They can collaborate, and perhaps this is the most powerful aspect of working in and with networks. We can achieve what is impossible achieve alone. So working together, it's a fundamental point for us. Connected to the other one I wanted to raise, that is our capacity to build strong alliances. It can be overwhelming sometimes, but there are many of us, and each one can play a different role. There are organizations, networks, social movements, educators, universities, as we know, family associations, and so many. And such alliances include many other fields of human rights, as health sector, protection sector, nutrition, all to promote this integral approach we want to foster. And I'm so glad to stress this point here, because this is something we have been doing permanently with OMEP in our work in the ECC promotion here in the region and internationally. Also, we are in a position, and that's very special too, to reconnect politics to pedagogy. And that's not a detail. This is something crucial for us. And simply because we are a network, and networks in plural, of educators, people who know pedagogy and in its transformative nature very well, and who can give a meaningful narrative to the ECCE we want. So transformative education must be the basis of our advocacy action as a movement. Coming to an end and to finalize this brief participation, I would say in times of setbacks and multiple crises, a defense of a comprehensive approach to ECCE based on the convention always depends very much on a vigilant, strengthened and active civil society. In view of common principles, networks and organizations in defense of child's rights connect together, strengthening intersectorial ties and connecting global efforts to local advocacy strategies, demanding states' obligations to be fully realized to all children, leaving no one behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanna. Our last presenter, Rajakumari Michael, will speak about monitoring early childhood care and education through the human rights framework. Okay.
Thank you, Sue. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you also see my slide? Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, friends. Good morning, friends. Sorry, I'm in the afternoon. Good morning and good afternoon, friends. I'm glad to be part of this OMEP's webinar series, and I sincerely thank OMEP, especially Mercedes and the leadership team, for the opportunity to share my views on the importance of monitoring early childhood care and education with OMEP members across the globe. My presentation on the importance of adapting human rights framework in monitoring early childhood care and education will highlight some key aspects and key features of monitoring ECCE. To begin with, I would like to highlight some of the key issues and challenges that remind us of the urgent need to advocate for concrete change towards full realization of right to early childhood care and education. As we all know and witness in many of our countries, likewise Mercedes also highlighted, children from the marginalized communities or those children who live in vulnerable situations do not have equal and quality access to ECCE. 1 out of 2 children do not receive pre-primary education, says UNICEF. This inequalities has been further exacerbated with the new challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. UNESCO's assessment indicates nearly 155 million children are affected due to the mass closure of preschool education. Yet, ECC is not a priority in any of the COVID response strategies in many countries. We all are aware of the status of ECCE financing, which is one of the major issues. UNICEF says 40% of the countries allocate less than 2% of education budget to ECCE. Despite these challenges, ECCE is not established as an explicit right in both national and international law. Only 63 countries have adopted free pre-primary education and 51 adopted compulsory pre-primary education. Glad to the work of CLAD and other partners in Latin America. Most of the countries are in Latin America among the 61 and 51. Although ECC has gained momentum and is included in many as one of the important targets in the Sustainable Development Goals and some education reports, it is largely neglected in the important education debates and researchers. Besides, a lot of new challenges are emerging. Private sectors are increasingly taking over ECCE segment due to low public investment and to the current situation. When we want to advocate for these changes from these realities, it requires tremendous effort and commitment from all stakeholders, including governments, civil society, academic professionals, and all intergovernmental agencies. That requires a systematic monitoring process and a lot of comprehensive data and regular assessment of legislations, public policies, budgets, quality of services, and violations in early childhood care and education by all stakeholders. And what we believe is, we believe in adapting a human rights framework for this monitoring work. And we believe this would bring in sustainable impact and change in the lives of young children. Why human rights framework for monitoring ECCE? The international human rights law recognizes young children as rights holders, and the Committee on the Rights of the Child in General Comment 7 reaffirms young children as right holders and reiterates that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is to be applied holistically in early childhood. The human rights framework, therefore, empowers young children as right holders and gives the authority to claim young children's rights and hold to duty bearers accountable in making ECCE affordable, accessible, good quality, and non-discriminatory. It also opens up avenues for civic participation and equity that would lead to achieving sustainable change. While monitoring ECCE, we need to consider several important aspects. But for today's discussion, I would like to highlight the 4 important features which I personally believe are essential in monitoring ECCE from a human rights perspective. This includes developing human rights indicators on key issues that need to be addressed and gaps to be bridged. And secondly, a disaggregation of data for tracking the progress of those who left behind. And third, I strongly believe a community-centric approach for an equitable and sustainable change. And fourth, alliance building and networking for collective action at all levels from the local to the global level. I know Giovanna and Mercedes they have highlighted some of this in their talk as an important steps in the advocacy. And I would like to re-emphasize these aspects from the monitoring so that the monitoring at different levels adds value in the advocacy process. The very important task of monitoring is to develop human rights indicators. These indicators will make advocacy more effective. It will empower rights holders and defenders. It will provide concrete situational analysis and help in identifying and pinpointing issues that we want to address. And a comprehensive monitoring on ECCE should cover different ECCE issues that we discussed in the beginning, that including the legislation and policies, budgets and infrastructure, governance and implementation, inclusion and issues of marginalized children, human resources, importantly, pedagogy and curriculum, whether they are child-friendly, whether they reflect the best interests of the child, and also the involvement of non-state actors, which we often tend to forget. SDGs focus on 2 very important indicators, but in order to address those pertaining issues, it needs to be broken down into different thematic areas based on the human rights standards and state obligations. The second aspect that I want to highlight is the importance of disaggregation of data. Leave no one behind is the key principle of SDGs, and it calls upon states to reach the furthest behind first. That's why there is a greater emphasis is placed on localizing SDGs. Disaggregation of data is essential not only to track progress of those who were left behind, but to ensure equitable access to all without any discrimination. For example, a country may have a good ECCE enrollment ratio, but the migrant children in that country may not have the same access to ECCE due to various reasons, including language and culture, lack of awareness, or maybe non-inclusion of ECCE in the migration policy. As a result, the enrollment ratio of migrant children in the country may be low, and it may not be inconsistent with the national data, where the national data may be high. Often in our research, we limit disaggregation of data with gender and disability, but one needs to include different vulnerability factors and, importantly, the intersectional impact of those vulnerabilities as well. UNDP has suggested a framework that covers different types of discriminations, different geographies, socioeconomic status, vulnerabilities caused due to poor governance, and other situations like climate change or conflicts or violence, etc. Disaggregation of data will also help us to define our advocacy demands more clearly. And this vulnerability may change from country to country. There are certain vulnerabilities that may exist in few countries. So we cannot go with just a standardized format at a global level. For example, I come from India. For us, one of the worst form of vulnerability that we experience is caste, which is often not included in any of the global debates or documents. So we fight a lot to include the word in the international human rights framework. So that's why I would like to highlight the vulnerabilities may change region to region, country to country, and depends on the situation. We need to include the different forms of vulnerabilities, importantly, the intersectional aspect of it. The third important feature that I want to highlight is the community participation and adapting a community-centric approach in monitoring. Community participation in the development process is a phenomena that has been increasingly recognized across the globe. Again, localizing SDGs emphasizes community participation in all aspects of decision-making, including data collection, monitoring, planning, and implementation. In the context of ECCE, it is important to involve communities. In most countries, ECCE centers are community-based. For example, in India, we have ECCE centers located in the community area, and most ECCE staff are recruited from the community itself. ECCE program also linked with parental education program. Some of the ECCE services are locally monitored by few community members. Community engagement is also important from the perspective of ECCE and its role in promoting gender equality. A mother who knows the child and who knows the ground reality would be able to assess the gaps effectively and suggest alternative solutions more effectively to the policymakers. The involvement of community is also grounded in the human rights principles of empowerment, inclusion, social justice, self-determination, and collective action. And it is also part of the empowering socially excluded and marginalized groups for monitoring ECCE at the local level. For an effective impact, monitoring must be done at different levels, from national, local, national, and global level. As Giovanna has highlighted strongly on the importance of working from grassroots to global, monitoring is also important from grassroots to global so that it adds more value in the advocacy process. As mentioned earlier, ECCE not recognized as a right in international law. This calls for a collective advocacy at the global level. At the same time, the lack of equal access and public investment, poor infrastructure needs a national strategy and advocacy. Hence, monitoring the situation at different levels can complement the different advocacy demands that we make at different levels. We need data and ground realities to demand to set human rights standards. On the other hand, we need human rights standards to place emphasis at national level to strengthen the national laws and the and the public investment and the implementation process. To conclude, ECCE is one of the neglected areas that requires consistent monitoring and advocacy. And monitoring is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. And also monitoring by itself is not an action itself. Monitoring is an integral component of advocacy. Hence, it should be followed up with strategic action points as suggested by Giovanna, and including legal interventions and global advocacy initiatives. Thank you once again to OMEP, and we have been partnering with OMEP, and in future, we look forward collaborating more with OMEP on monitoring and taking global advocacy initiatives on ECCE. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. Okay, we shall now proceed to the discussions. I'll read the question as it is written on the chat room. first of all, I would like to call upon Giovanna. Are you ready? Okay. What are the main challenges related to the ECCE financing in the regions? Can you answer that?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you so much, because financing is actually a crucial issue for us in the region. That's challenging even to track or to monitor. Since data is fragmented in various ministries or government sectors, so it's very challenging for us from civil society to have access to this data.
Okay.
So one starting point is to demand to have clear and transparent data available, because sometimes the Ministry of Education, for instance, will argue that they don't have enough money. But if you look at other ministries, they might have. So we need to have this picture very clear. Another key issue related to that is to have not only enough public resources, but also safe public resources guaranteed in legislation. That's really important from our point of view. So as civil society movements, we try to understand, not only to understand, but also to calculate how much in which context, obviously, is enough, would be enough, considering the number of students, the number of teachers, the structure needed, materials, teacher training, all of these important aspects. And this amount is precisely the amount of resources that we are going to argue that is needed, not demanding from ministries, but also from the parliament as well. That is a key actor when we talk about budget. So we cannot hear you.
All right. Thank you for clearing the point for us. Now is a question for Rajakumari. What is the ECC issues that requiring urgent attentions for global actions?
Thank you, Zu. I think all the issues that I highlighted in the beginning of my presentation are important. However, I would ground it to two key issues. One on strengthening the normative framework, especially at the national and international level. And second, the public investment for ECCE. I think this too would, to some extent, will be able to solve other issues, because these two are the main issues that need to be really addressed immediately. When you have a legal framework guaranteed, it gives you kind of a hope and to further for implementation. Similarly, when there is a public investment, then the infrastructure could be improved. Then you can appoint staff, ECCE personnel, resources could be more in terms of other services. So I feel these two issues are very important, especially at an international level. We need to emphasize for a recognition of ECCE as a right for a free and compulsory ECCE that is guaranteed to all children. So I think that these two are, I would go for it.
Okay, all right, thanks. Now, final question for the Mercedes. You mentioned that the document on the role of a civil society organization in 2050 from the UNESCO Collective Constellation of the NGOs on the education of 2030. So what would be the most important proposal for the advocacy work for ECCE?
Thank you, Soon. Well, the CCNGO Coordination Group has elaborated 9 recommendations to guide and support civil society organizations and partners towards shaping their work. Civil society organization as the voice of diversity, inclusion, and collective thinking should strengthen the role in shaping education. We must strive to fully include it in decision-making within national, regional, and global governance institutions. We must be active in the construction of an inclusive normative for education and nurture professionals and experts with a humanistic lens in order to provide a critical, analytical reflection and human-centered development framework. We should also strengthen cooperation, partnerships, joint advocacy, and accountability between NGOs and other future public or private actors at national, regional, and local levels. Civil society organizations should reinforce their engagement and capacity in data collection. As Raji said, it is very, very important, monitoring and research, both to inform decision-making and to contribute to developing education and realizing rights. And finally, we should continue to support the developing of freedom, critical thinking in education, and lifelong learning at community level to foster active and empowered citizens with relevant skills for the present and for the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for answering all those questions. As stated in the contents of today's sessions, OMEP will actually continue to strengthen organizations and networking and advocating children's rights. So we will also speak together, right, of the children around the world. So we have come to the end of our given time period. So I would like to close the session by thanking the speakers and all of those who have taken part of this session. So these live transmissions will carry on through the OMEP World TV YouTube channel. Video will then be available in the 3 official OMEP languages. And after the live seminars, asynchronous debating will be actually promoted during the weeks. So those people who could not attend the live, you could actually come in and join us. So see you all next OMEP Seminar Series in 2021 through 2022. Okay, see you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Gracias por estar. Thank you. Thank you for coming in to share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Gracias.
Bye-bye.